Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. So today we're going to talk about burnout and exhaustion. If you've ever been in a place where you're a business owner or just a human being that breathes air on planet Earth, and you've been tired and exhausted and struggling to figure out how to find an experience of wholeness and still embrace all the elements of life, then this is the episode for you. We're going to dive into all things practical and spiritual and how to engage the two. So today, my guest on the show is the wise wizard, ZofiaRennea Morales. A little brief bio of her. She came from the corporate world, Fortune 100. She was a global strategist, former biophysicist. And then she had this wild health experience and she's going to get into this more, but undiagnosed Lyme disease, and took her to rock bottom, where she really had this spiritual awakening, and she emerged with this fusion that she's going to be able to offer us today, from powerhouse corporate world and then empowered spiritual grounded world. And so the best of both. So now she is in this space where I even asked her, I said, how would you describe yourself? So she would be the practical mystic if you combined a corporate executive coach, the spiritual healer. Is something of that. She runs many things, but she is the host of her show, The Sovereign Self. It's a talk radio show. So with all that and many more unnamed accolades, ZofiaRennea Morales, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Matthew. I am thrilled to be here. I'm so excited you invited me, and I am so looking forward to our conversation.
Yes, we're going to have a blast. So I just want to first kind of kick it off to you to say, is there anything that in this whole space of business, entrepreneurship, corporate world, success, and then, the spiritual experience, the mystical, those being your domains, what are you reading about right now? Like, what's got your fascination, your curiosity? Is there something that you're just like jamming on?
Oh, my current theme is helping women navigate what I want to call historically male-dominated areas, okay? And the C-suite is one of those things. Science is one of those things. Technology remains one of those things. And so in my life path, I was very rational, corporate, et cetera, until about 15, 16 years ago. And then I got deathly ill, and I didn't have a way out. It's a very long story. I'm not going to go into all the gory details, but it involved bankruptcy, mystery illnesses, and completely losing my ability to remember what I was doing, to form cogent sentences, and all of that amazing intellect that had gotten me to where I was just yanked out from under me. It's like, okay, so now what are you gonna do? And so, and your soul will do that when it's time to pay attention. It will take your favorite toy away and tell you to sit on the bench and think about things. You need to reevaluate your life. And I arrived at this dark night of the soul moment. And after ceasing to struggle, and I struggled for a long time trying to solve the problem myself. I finally in the spiritual world, they would call it surrender. I was just too freaking exhausted, and I finally accepted I did not have an answer or a way out of the problem, and I was probably just going to die. And in that moment of exhaustion, of no answers, I remembered that I did have an experience of God when I was younger. I was raised in what I would call religious abuse. It was a very fundamentalist religion. And so I went a long ways away from that when I became an adult. And in my heart, I knew that God was nothing like what they were describing God to be. He's not vengeful. He doesn't tell people to go take over other people's lands and have them wage war. This is not what God is. And I decided in that moment it wouldn't hurt anything to try praying. And I said, God, I will do anything to get better. And I got my first miracle because I fell asleep my brain had deteriorated to the point that it wasn't going through normal sleep cycles. And so just sleeping was like, oh, what a blessing. And then in the morning, I awoke with this understanding that I had to go and get one of these clearing IVs from the doctor. We're in bankruptcy. I don't have discretionary money at this point. I've got no clue how I'm paying for this, but I just went on trust. It's like, yes, it's the logical thing to do. It may have came from my intuition, but it is a logical thing to do, even though I don't understand how I will pay for it. And while I was sitting in the infusion room, the doctor walked through, which he doesn't do. I mean, the nurses and the technicians, sure, you see all of them, but he never walks through there. And so I waved him over and said, here's the situation. In bankruptcy, no way to pay for the treatment plan. Insurance has said that they're not going to pay, and even the Bank of Dad was empty. And he says, oh, good, insurance is out of the picture. You have more options now. And I went, wow. That was like the last thing I expected to hear from the doctor.
Right.
It's like, wow, I have more options without insurance. What a beautiful thing. And
amazing.
Yeah. And so he said, we have this naturopath herbalist that's on staff, and his office visits are half the cost of mine. And he completely works with getting rid of parasites, which is what you have, using herbs and that kind of stuff that are like $30 and $40 a bottle. It's a much less expensive treatment plan.
Yeah.
And if he'd have said that to me even a week earlier, I'd have been like, are you out of your mind? It's all old wives' tale and bunk. Why would I go to an herbalist, right? But when you literally have no options, you're willing to try some things.
Yeah.
And I went to see him, and that was kind of the real beginning of the unfolding of the anything I had promised to God. And one of the things I discovered as I was sitting in the waiting room was this book called The Emotion Code. Now, I was raised by a German and a Norwegian. If you know anything about Germans and Norwegians, emotions are like verboten. You don't have them. Should an inconvenient emotion come up, you should put that down, stuff it in a little box, and pretend it didn't happen, because it will simply get in your way. Emotions are bad. Okay. Now, I've spent plenty of time on the psychiatrist's couch at this point, recovering from my very dysfunctional childhood. And I can remember describing to the last one in the series of those that I went to, she's like, why are you coming? I'm like, it's like I have these moving boxes of emotions stacked up. You know how when you pack up your house, suddenly it's like way too small because everything's not where it belongs. And that's the way it felt like in my inner world. Every time I would turn around, I would bump into a box and it would like knock over, and icky emotions would spill out and make a mess all over the place. And so when I saw the cover on this book, it's like, yes, if this guy knows the code, I want to understand. Yeah. And so that was like my first baby step into the more what I describe as woo world. Yeah. And he had a technique in there that they call muscle testing. You may also hear it called kinesiology. And that was actually a good first step for me as a scientifically trained person, because as a scientist, we're comfortable with the black box. Okay. The black box is you put in input A and input B comes out the other side, and it happens every time. And as long as it's always happens the same way every time, then that's a reliable tool for use. And that's the way muscle testing was for me. I could prove that it would get me to truth. I can't tell you how. There are lots of theories on how. I'm not even going to go into those, but he used it as part of getting to, well, what are the emotions that need to go away? And he had a nice process. I'm a scientist. I love process. And so this was all very acceptable to me. And so I started clearing out these old emotions. And I got to tell you, it did me a lot more good than, 3 decades of psychoanalysis. So that was fabulous.
Mm.
And the longer I went through this healing process, and I was with this herbalist for like 3 months, the
Okay.
prognosis initially with the conventional medicine was we might get you well in 2 years. It might take 3. 3
Yeah.
months, I was better.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
wow is right. I'm like, that is some seriously awesome shit. But the other
Wow.
thing that went along as I went through this process and I'm clearing these emotions and I'm taking down my heart wall is strange shit starts happening.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the only way to describe it. I would go into Walmart and I would hear the thoughts of the people around me, and I would see somebody do something that doesn't make sense to me. And I'm a people watcher.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
would go ahead and ask myself, I wonder what led them to that being the logical decision, because we don't make
Yeah.
illogical choices.
Yeah.
Okay. And I would be shown exactly the sequence of events that made that the logical choice for them.
Mm.
It's like, this is extremely strange.
Mm.
And then I arrived home from the grocery store one afternoon, and my neighbor is helping her husband into the house. They're in their 80s.
Mm.
He's doubled over in pain, and she's staggering under his weight. So the ice cream can melt. I grab his other arm and I help her get him in
Mm.
the house. And she's telling me that his kidney situation has become just horrendous.
Wow.
And so I get him in the house. She goes to call the kidney doctor for an appointment. And I'm standing with him in the living room trying to provide what comfort I can. And his eyes are closed, his lips are moving, and I understand that I am watching a very private moment with his God.
Mm-hmm.
And so I closed my eyes to give him some privacy. And in my mind's eye, I saw this little tiny flame, and it looked like a pilot light on the edge of going out. It was bouncing and flickering like they do before it goes poof.
Mm-hmm.
And I understood that's where he was at with his life force. And so I haven't acknowledged who I'm talking to yet, even. And I said, is there something we can do about that? And it immediately flared up into this great big fire. And he dropped my hands. So my eyes flew open. And he says, are you a healer? And I'm looking around to see who the heck he's talking to, because this, no. No. This faith healing stuff is a no. And I was saved from having to answer because his wife came in and said they got the appointment, had to leave right now. And it was one of these moments, because I'd spent the prior like 3 weeks up to this explaining away all the other weird shit that was going on. And I was kind of secretly convinced that they were going to send the guys with the white coat and the wraparound arms if I shared it with anyone. And so I keep, the scientist keeps going, nope, not possible. You've got more brain damage than you realize. You've got a really creative imagination, all the explanations for the strange things that are going on. And a couple of days later, I went next door to check on them, expecting that she's at the ICU or planning a funeral. And no, she invites me in the house, and there he is, kicked back in the Barca Lounger. He's got his drink and his remote and his book, and he's fat and happy. And I said, how you doing? He says, it was the strangest thing. I was feeling pretty good by the time I got to the doctor's office. They ran me through the usual battery of tests that I normally fail ignominiously, and my results came back normal. And that was the moment when the scientist had to sit down, shut the fuck up.
Yeah.
And I had to start to accept that I might need to look at some of this stuff through a different filter. There is something more going on here that I cannot possibly explain as a scientist.
Yeah.
And so that was like my step into the woo world. And I spent 10 years in the woo world helping people solve recurring problems that weren't responding to like the normal stuff.
Yeah.
And then recently I got this feeling that I needed to move it my whole self into this, right?
Mm.
Because before I was all the scientist and rational, and then I went
Hmm.
completely woo for over a decade. And now it's like, no, you need to bring both pieces of yourself to the puzzle.
Yeah.
And so that's where the helping women in male dominated industries excel
Yeah.
comes into
Sure.
the picture, because I was really good at that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you can do it without paying the same price that I paid, because I
Yeah.
ignored the shit out of my body. I ignored the
Yeah.
hell out of my health, and I did it the hard way. And there are
Yeah.
much easier ways to achieve that success in your life.
Hmm. Man, that's good. There's so much there. There's so much there. It's man, thanks for sharing your story. It's my mind goes in a few different places because it's just so fascinating.
It was one of those spiritual two by four up the head kind of moments.
Yeah.
You know, your soul will invite you to be curious about things as you go along.
Yeah.
And being German and Norwegian, I was stubborn. You know, books
Yeah.
would fall off the shelf in the bookstore, and I would pick it up and go, they need to shelve this better. And I would put it
Yeah.
back,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. It's so interesting. Yeah, the so many times the scientific world is just like I mean, we love polarities. We love like the political landscape. We love it just for whatever reasons it sells or it markets better to have polarity. Like we're there's two sides there,
Yeah,
there's two. It's like
we're at
actually it
war, rally
yeah, it's
behind this cause. Yeah.
yeah. And it's like, well, actually, the fact that you're a human being on planet Earth means you have a lot more in common with other humans than you
Then,
don't. And the fact
yeah.
that you're in it, you just keep going down. Like we might seem like enemies. The fact that we're like speak English and we live in America, like we have way more in common as brothers and sisters than we don't. And so, yeah, the scientific world, and the spiritual world, it can seem like
Well, and
yeah,
the
juxtaposed.
marketing world really tends to like exacerbate that. If
Yeah,
you've taken any marketing or
yeah,
looked at any of that, it's like, yeah, you want to take a stand, you want to have an opinion because that's what
yeah,
draws people to you.
yeah,
And
polarized.
yeah, exactly. And fear is a strong motivator,
Yeah,
which is why the whole war on whatever
yeah.
does tend to rally people, but it does not, unfortunately, tend to lead to a solution.
Hmm.
It tends to lead to more drama and additional
Hmm.
problems,
Yeah.
because when you bring two hostile parties to a table, they
Hmm.
don't there's no trust, and
Yeah.
you need the trust to build the solution.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so true. And I guess I'm curious what that has looked like for you in terms of, so you're a fascinating case study, right? Because you bring both. You bring like the hardcore scientist, Fortune 100 corporate world, and then you bring the spiritual mystical world. And so and yeah, right, sometimes people can have a conversion experience one way or the other. Hey, all this religious spiritual stuff is total bunk. I'm just going to go
Yep.
become a scientist, or like become or start a business and ground myself in matter. And then, or like, oh man, I had this awakening and now I'm a monk in a monastery. So it's the integrate, and oftentimes there's a synthesis that's greater
Yeah.
than the sum of the parts. And so I'm just curious, like maybe can you riff on that a little bit of like what's that been like, or what's your experience been like as you've lived in both separately and then sought to like integrate the truth that like, hey, maybe these aren't at war, maybe there's like a synthesis of the two
Yeah.
parts.
Yeah, there is a synergy to be had. There is a
Hmm.
balance to be had. And I like to use the analogy of walking,
Yeah.
right? Because the two experiences you talked about,
Hmm.
all rational, all
Yeah.
spiritual, right?
Yeah.
Those are two extremes. Again, we're in this world of
Hmm.
duality.
Hmm.
And what I'm currently striving for is a spot in the middle.
Yeah.
And what balance looks like, balance is not a static thing. A lot of times
Hmm.
we think about balance and it's just right
Hmm.
there and it doesn't sway. And that's not honestly how balance works. If you think about riding a bike, riding a horse, walking, you're never just in one place.
Yeah.
Balance is a completely dynamic thing, and you swing a
Mm-hmm.
little bit more to the right to bring your leg forward, then you swing a little more to
Yeah.
the left to bring the other. And that's what balance functionally is in our lives. There's never like, oh, I found my balance and
Yeah.
I'm just pegged right there.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's always a push and a pull
Mm-hmm.
between the rational and the rational, logical, whatever,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
the spiritual. There's always a push and a pull between the personal and the professional.
Yeah.
And it's a matter of learning how and when to lean which direction to keep
Yeah.
everything, what do I want to say, from dumping over
Yeah.
into one side completely.
Yeah. No, that's really well said. And I had thought about that recently of right, like walking it's the balance comes in motion and momentum. Like with a bike is perfectly balanced only because it's in motion. And like walking, it's actually a series of weights and counterweights, but walking only works because like if you were to freeze frame, you would probably fall over unless you're using muscle control. And so, yeah, that is interesting. It makes me think of, I haven't piloted or driven boats. Yeah, go for it.
And I love that you brought in the forward momentum because I think that's important. I think a lot of the times when we've been sidelined by a massive event like this, and we're coming out of it and going, okay, I need more balance in my life. Okay, it's very common to go way too far the other direction. Right? Because it's like getting up out of the chair. You really have to pull some momentum. And then once you're up, then you have to kind of swing back the other way and start to really center in on how it's going to be to have both things. But a lot of people are like, well, I need to find that balance while I'm standing right here in front of the chair. And that's actually harder than if you start moving forward and go trusting that you will begin to bring in the balance pieces you need as you're moving forward.
And that's such a good, like, as a practical piece of advice for those listening, like, hey, just get going, like with the best data you have, with the best intuition you have, just start moving. And sometimes I find like, sometimes cliches aren't helpful, but I find myself coming back to like, actually a lot of cliches are cliches because like they're true and maybe
they apply so many places.
And maybe it's sometimes they lose their potency because they're cliches, but when you come back to them like, oh, that's why we say this thing. So yeah, I think that's really well said. And it's like with the boat, someone was teaching recently and they were talking about either a spaceship or a boat. And I remember this when I was driving my grandfather's boat, maybe when I was younger, and he was like, all right, keep this course. And it was a motorboat. It was on the Great Lakes. I used to live off the Great Lakes.
They're rough as heck to try to navigate too.
By the by the Bay of Green Bay. And so what would happen is I was a kid and we would do, it was like, if this was the point with the tide and the waves, the boat would do this. And of course,
and then you kind of got to bring it back.
And I was never on course, but my being off course was balanced. I was equally off course on both sides enough to get me where I wanted to go. And so, yeah, there's probably something there too of like, hey, like the game isn't perfection. The game is like playing baseball, like the diamond field. Like, are you within a scope, moving that scope?
Yeah, exactly. And I see that a lot with women. We're raised with this desire to be perfect, right? The perfect little girl, nice and quiet and polite and all of the things. And that's not life. That doesn't serve us. And a lot of times inside of ourselves, we beat ourselves up for having overcorrected because of a sick child or overcorrected into work because of a special project. And I guess what I would say is it's okay. It's okay. You're okay. That is perfectly normal. And give yourself some space and some grace around it. Your child is not going to be irretrievably wounded.
Yeah.
because you had to spend a few extra days on this project,
Yeah.
and work, your career is not irretrievably wounded because you had to spend a few extra days with your child when they were sick.
Yeah. That's so true. And as you're talking, it makes me think of, it's just adjacently related, but um
Well, and I
the
have one more thing to
oh yeah,
share,
yeah,
which
please
is,
dive in,
right,
close the
we
loop.
talked about the family, we talked about the
Mm,
kids. The thing that tends to get forgotten, and I forgot this for many years,
yeah.
and I like to bring forward to women, is make time for you. Just you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just you. Whatever it looks like, whether you've got um, a bubble bath that is calling your name,
Yeah.
and just 45 minutes locked away
Yeah.
from all of the drama,
Yeah.
and whatever, your spouse will survive.
Yeah.
Your
Yeah.
kids will make it if you're in there for 45 minutes.
Yeah.
Just recentering yourself, reclaiming yourself. If you have a hobby you like to do, bring some of that stuff forward,
Yeah.
because that's part of what makes your life worth living.
Yeah.
And one thing that I discovered going through this is happiness is not out there someplace at the
Mm,
moment you've arrived at whatever you've defined success to be.
yeah.
It's not there. If you want happiness in your life, you have to engineer it into your life now.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's part of the journey.
Yeah. That's so true. The making time for yourself. Yeah, a lady that was Sarah Vittore, I believe is how I pronounce her name. Her husband's Italian. She was a guest just a couple episodes ago, and it was such a cool episode. So we talked about like somatic experiencing and kind of finding like so she works with athletes, and then she works with, on the woo side or whatever, but she'll be like, I have a website for the spiritual woo side. I have a website for working with high level athletes. But it's this whole like somatic experiencing, coming back into your body, finding, and I was
And
like,
you have to do that. I know
yeah,
a lot of us leave our bodies as a
yeah,
matter of course. We're trained into that in the
yeah,
West, to
yeah,
not really be seated in our bodies and
yeah,
acknowledge their needs. It's
mm-hmm,
like, yeah, press on regardless.
yeah,
And that's not really good advice on a
yeah,
day-to-day basis. Sure, there's a moment where you need to press on regardless. Maybe you've got to rush into a fire to save your
yeah,
child or your dog or something. Yeah,
yeah,
great. In that moment, you absolutely ignore the body, go do the thing, and get
yeah,
it done. But
yeah,
you can't live in that mode.
yeah,
And so it's important to take the time for
yeah,
you. They
yeah,
talk a lot about self-care,
yeah,
and my beef with a lot of the self-care people out there are like, go get your hair done and your nails. That's fabulous.
yeah,
Pamper yourself, get a
yeah,
massage. Fabulous. Pamper yourself, but
mm,
give yourself the gift of time.
yeah,
That is so much better
yeah,
than buying yourself treats and trinkets.
yeah,
Give yourself some peace, some
yeah,
headspace, just to breathe.
yeah. I'm so with you. Like I found, for myself, I fall probably more in that, my wife and I, we love going. Powell's is the largest used bookstore, I think, in the country, in Portland, Oregon, here where I live. And so
Sure.
it's like 4 stories high, and a block, takes up a whole city block. But so we'll walk through. And so we saw a couple ones on like highly sensitive people, and there's kind of some definitions there. We were kind of flipping through it, and I'm like, yeah, I think it was really fascinating. One was like the survival guide for highly sensitive people. And it was really interesting because both her and I would probably fall in that highly sensitive people, but we would experience it differently. Like
Sure.
the senses kind of relate differently. Even some other things they were saying, like, hey, highly sensitive people love water. And I was like, that is so funny. Like a few years ago, I started like taking really, really long showers, and just like
Mm-hmm.
in the morning and evening, I would just sit in the shower for like 45 minutes. And there's a number of reasons why, but anyways, it just that element of, for myself, I go through the day, and it's like I have my all of my software out and I'm picking up data all day long, as if I'm like
Yeah.
in the field as a biologist. I've got my
Yeah.
microphones.
Data. Yes.
Yeah, pulling, mining, and I'm listening. I've got my mics up, so I'm listening to the animals. I've got my seismic thing, listening to the movement of the earth. I'm pulling in all this data, and I'm like, man, if I don't defrag, if I don't give time for my computer, my hard drive to decompress and sort and place the data, then I just like flatline. And so,
yeah. Well, and you end up in this space of like overwhelm, right? Because
yeah,
you've got all this
yeah,
unprocessed stuff sitting there.
yeah,
And I find one of the hints that somebody is a highly sensitive person is they've developed some, what do I want to say? Some coping mechanisms that are less than functional in their lives.
yeah,
They don't say no.
yeah,
They want to people please. They don't set
yeah,
the boundaries that need to be set to get them the space that they need.
yeah,
And to be fair, that's a hard thing to do as a human being, full
yeah,
stop.
yeah,
But it's 3 times harder if you're highly sensitive, because you don't just have the challenge of saying no, but
yeah,
you also receive all the emotional unspoken backlash from the other
right,
person who's getting the no.
yeah, yeah,
And so one of the signs that you might be a highly sensitive person
mhm,
is you are a people pleaser. You try
yeah,
to fix everybody around you so you can get some peace.
right, right.
Yeah.
No, it's so interesting. And it was just to the point of where you said like making time for yourself. It's like, I found like, hey, I have to build in these white spaces into my life that are like on Saturday, I try not to plan anything. Like I have a slow morning, or at least once a year, and trying to build that more in, and my wife is incredibly supportive, and we try and get each other to where we're the best version of ourselves. So it's like negotiating that, but like going away when I go away for kind of a spiritual renewal every year, and
Yeah.
going away this year again, just at this little cottage on the beach, and just a couple days where I try and put my phone away, and it just like as the stillness
Yep.
settles in, maybe I go for hikes, I read fiction, whatever, but it's that white noise, that white space, that time that you were saying that like, oh man, things begin to crystallize.
Just to breathe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You begin to
And
breathe.
and you don't have to wait till you're in a financial position where you can go get the cottage on the
No.
beach.
Yeah.
All you need to do is establish some
Yeah.
boundaries and
Yeah.
make sure that you've protected that time. So if you have
Yeah.
kids, maybe they go visit the grandparents or they overnight with
Totally.
some friends.
Yeah.
There are many ways,
Yeah.
excuse me, to make this time that don't involve necessarily cash money.
Totally.
But you do have to be really structured about them. When
Yeah.
my husband went into self-employment, he does
Yeah.
pharmaceutical consulting.
Yeah. Yeah.
So science is never very far from my life.
Yeah.
We made an agreement that there would be no work on Sunday, period.
Yeah.
Full stop.
Yeah.
And when you're self-employed, there's always something else
Yeah.
that needs done. And so
Yeah.
unless you draw that really hard boundary,
Yeah.
you'll work yourself into an early grave.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Yeah. You've got it. When you're building your own thing, you've got to set imaginary boundaries that are like life and death. Cause you could also, no one's going to tell you yes, no one's going to tell you no. And to the point of the cash option, totally. It's like, hey, I have a friend that has, it's honestly more like a little mobile home by the beach. So it's like so it's like, didn't cost me anything. I was able to
Yep.
go for a weekend. It's like, yeah, I'm like, I don't have the money at this stage per se to once a month go and rent a thing. But so totally, it's finding, it doesn't have to be, oh, someday when I'm old.
Someday when I have money, I'm going to
Yeah.
get this Airbnb. No, I mean, that'll be beautiful
Yeah.
when you have money and you can do that. But right now, you need to be able to unplug. So
Yeah.
how do we pragmatically make that happen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. And I think that's what, Sarah Vittoria, that was making me think of, she was sharing how in her journey going, like, again, similarly to your story, like had this crazy burnout. She was very successful, has her master's and a number of accolades, and went on this journey of like, oh, I actually need to start listening to my body. Oh, I actually need, so she makes like, she'll have like daily micro pauses for 5 to 10 minutes or a half hour. She'll have maybe two or 3 hours. Cause I was like, what rituals do you set in place? What habits and
Yeah.
practices? She'll have 2 or 3 hours on the weekend to herself. And then quarterly, and she's got kids and family. Quarterly, she sets a weekend where she goes away somewhere. And heck, even right, it could be, it could be camping in a tent, right? It doesn't have to be.
It doesn't matter where away is, but as long as it's an electronic free zone and no one's going to come yank you out of it. And that has worked out very well for my husband and I. And thankfully, we're now at the point again where we can think about things like Airbnbs. And the computers don't go along. The computers stay home.
Yeah.
It's part of the rule.
There's such the stimuli. There's such sometimes I look at my phone, I'm like, it's not the right relationship, but it's like, I hate you so much. Sometimes it's like, oh man, and
that's a sign it's time for a detox.
And man, when I will leave my phone and technology and go away, like there's such this like palpable, and so it takes immense discipline to use the tool, and not have a tool use you. A phone is powerful and it opens up worlds to us, but
and here's one of the tools that I've acquired as I've been going through my woo journey, as I was pivoting back into the more balanced side of things. Hypnosis. Now, a lot of people are going to be like, oh, stage, cluck like a chicken, forget the number 4. Okay. Forget all of that Hollywood junk. Okay. What hypnosis is, it's basically a meditation with a goal where you're saying to your subconscious mind, okay, you created this coping mechanism for me, whatever it happens to be. It might be escapism into your phone and that digital addiction. Okay, I know you're doing this to serve me. I'd like you to tell me how it serves me. Okay. And your mind will tell you that. It will share that with you when you're in this relaxed theta meditative state in a way that it wouldn't tell you while your conscious mind was up there going 2 + 2 = 4, right? And the subconscious is like gravity. Okay. What's in there is going to win. You can have all the willpower you want, but if there is a reason that having that donut and the extra weight on your thighs is protecting you, you will have that extra donut come 4 o'clock when you are totally exhausted. Because the subconscious will always win. And so the beautiful thing with hypnosis is we can find out how that's serving you, because you never do anything that's not serving you in some way. And then you can choose to change it. Okay, this is no longer an effective way to keep me safe in that way. Here's what we're going to do instead. And it changes so much faster than any other change method I have run into in my life, because you're going straight to the source of the belief. You're going straight to the source of the unconscious habit. Whereas if you go to therapy, if you do CBT, if you try to flick your wrist with a rubber band, all these different things that are recommended, you'll get there eventually. But do you want to take the long road on this, or do you want to just get it over with? They did a study, and I love hypnosis because it has been studied, and they looked at 600 sessions of psychotherapy. Now, I don't know what your insurance plan covers, but it's not 600.
I'll have to check.
And they compared it to 6 sessions of hypnotherapy. And for the presenting problem, there were a variety of presenting problems. What they saw was a 34% improvement in the talk therapy, psychotherapy group. They saw a 96% improvement with 6 sessions of hypnotherapy for the similar set of presenting problems. So okay, you can pay your copay and get as much psychotherapy as your insurance company will let you have. Okay. And try and just willpower your way through it. Or you can break out your wallet and go, okay, I'm going to bite the bullet and get this sucker done in 6 sessions.
Totally. I've seen some people. Right. Cause there is a big stigma around hypnosis. I have that knee-jerk reaction to it, but some of the people, I started to see it redefined in different terms.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, okay, this, I think it's been done a disservice by the state
The
fair.
Hollywood
Yeah.
stuff and
Or the guy at the state fair.
Yeah,
that has
exactly.
I think it's been done a disservice. Yeah.
And I think the fact that you can go get a hypnosis certification in a weekend is not a good thing. I think that does a disservice also to it. So what I would say is, if you decide to have someone help you tinker around in your subconscious mind, get somebody who's had an actual training class that's like more than a weekend. You know, the certification I went through was 3 months long, and you had to have a certain number of clinical hours. That's what you're looking for in a hypnotherapist, because you don't want anyone in there who doesn't know what they're doing.
If someone wanted to like pop on YouTube and watch it, like either watch people have a dialogue about it, or watch like a basic 101 self-guided, is there either, are there a couple of ones that you've done, or are there a couple of people too that you really enjoy? Like,
there are a couple of people I would recommend people looking at. And the first one is Grace Smith. She has done an amazing job. She's very scientific in the way she approaches her work. And yet she allows for the subconscious mind to work the way that it works, which is imagery and beliefs and archetypes and all of the Jungian kind of stuff that you've heard about. And so it opens up all the possibilities. I know when I have worked with woo clients, when I was doing just straight woo practice, before even I'd learned hypnosis, you know, we would get these representations that would step forward in the session that didn't seem to have much to do directly with the problem, but yet it would resolve the problem for the client going forward. And hypnosis is much the same. The subconscious mind uses those same kind of structures. And so it's sort of irrelevant whether you can actually have a past life or a future life or a parallel life. Doesn't matter if that's factually accurate, as long as you've got the archetypes to work with to solve the problem. Who cares if it's a factual thing or not, as long as it resolves the issue.
And that's so, like, touching on that in almost like a scientific approach to spiritual problems, like to some degree, it's like, hey, look, in talking to the whole audience, right? Talking to people that are like spiritual, come from a religion, a faith, a spiritual practice, or come from a science background. It's like talking to both of them, like, because from the scientific background, there's some things that haven't been accepted, more of like chiropractic work or Eastern medicine, that it's like talking to that, like to Western medicine, like, look, man, if this practice solves the problem repeatedly, you've got to at least admit that there's something
happening there. Yeah, regardless if you want to call it chi or whatever is going on.
Yeah.
Or however they're describing the mechanism. Who cares if that's factual? We can definitely say, yes, if you go get acupuncture for this, that it can, in fact, do amazing things with your healing. It saved me from having to have double knee surgery. So love acupuncture.
Well, and it's like, and some of those things are hard. We're like, and I've like experimented with a lot of different like health, medical alternative stuff. And so some of it is like, oh, I don't know whether that was just like not the best practitioner, or some of it seems like it's hit or miss. But the bottom line too, it's like, from a scientific method, it's like, hey, look, you've got, even if you don't understand the how, you can't discount the result. And to the spiritual people, it's like, hey, if there's something in the medical science world that's working, even if it doesn't line up with your beliefs, well, you're like, well, that's not.
Let's go with what works, right?
Go with what works.
And here's the interesting thing, right? My husband does drug development. Okay. And I'm deep in the subconscious mind. I have been for 15 years now. The interesting thing is, when they test a drug in the market, right, to see if it has efficacy, they test it against placebo. Placebo is basically your conscious mind's ability to fix the problem.
This
And
is
so
so
if the
fascinating.
drug can do better than your subconscious mind's ability to fix the problem within your body,
Yeah.
then it's considered an effective drug and it can be
Yeah.
taken to the market.
Yeah.
How's that for a deal? So the standard that science goes against is, well, if your subconscious mind can fix the
Yeah.
problem just by taking an action that you were directed to do that you trusted
Yeah.
in, okay,
Yeah.
then the drug has to do better than that.
Yeah.
And I find
And
that fascinating.
yeah, because it's like, and I remember I was diving into it. I do many YouTube deep dives at 2 a.m. in the morning, but it was, someone was talking about like, wait, hold on. We viewed the placebo effect as a negative, muddying the water. But if we pause, like, hold on, the placebo effect is the body's ability to like heal itself on command. When your mind is like, hey, it's time to heal, your body's like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, I have a pill. I have a reason to heal
Yeah,
myself.
this man in a white coat told me that if I do this, I will get better. So therefore, I will go get better because I believe that the man in the white coat knows what he's doing. And I think, to get up on my soapbox, I think we need to
Get
train
up
our
there.
doctors a little bit more
Yeah.
in what the placebo effect is and to be a little more cautious with the prognostications that they make.
Yeah.
Because I think you can placebo people right out of continuing to live. So you need to be a little
Oh,
cautious when you say, well, you have X amount of time, wrap up your affairs.
Yeah.
I wouldn't go there that strongly.
Yeah.
I really wouldn't go there that
Yeah.
strongly because there are
Yeah.
people who will turn it around against all odds. And so let's give them the
100%.
best chance they can have.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. 100%. As you were talking, this question came to me. So I'm curious what you say, just on adjacent trail. As you were talking, there's a lot of ideas that we have as we go through life. But then I think sometimes there's only a few things that we really know to be true.
Yeah.
And I would say this for myself, of like, when I boil life down, like there's a lot that I think is true and I'm kind of betting on, but so I'm curious for you, what are those things, as you've like had wild arcs and epic eras in your seasons, like at this point in life, what are the handful of things that you'd say, like, I know these are the things that I know to be true in like the core of my being? What are those things?
Operate your life from love.
Yeah.
Love will solve a lot of problems that you wouldn't imagine could be solved by love.
Yeah.
Seek to understand. Listen
Yeah.
really to what the other person is saying. Don't take any of what
Mhm.
they're saying personally, because it's not about you. It's about
Yeah.
them. Even if you resemble some of what
Mhm.
they're talking about, put it aside and really seek to
Mhm.
understand the other person. A person who's understood will then be ready to listen to you.
Mhm.
Um,
I'm writing these down. These are good.
and love yourself first.
Mhm.
If you don't love yourself, you really truly can't love anyone else to the maximum you're capable of. You will always have an empty cup when it comes to trying to fill
Mhm.
someone else. So make sure you love yourself first. Allow others to fill that love cup for you. I know, back to women, we
Hey,
tend to
let's
be
go, man.
trained. We tend to be
Yeah.
trained
Yeah.
that, everybody else needs to be taken care of first.
Yeah.
And you've got to take care of all these other people. And once everybody else is happy, then you
Yeah.
can have what's left over. And typically there's not much. And that is totally backwards from what needs to
Yeah.
happen for you to really thrive and flourish as a person in this world,
Yeah.
and to really be able to be in a position to care for others.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah. As I've asked myself a version of that question, even as it comes to the things of faith and spirituality, and I, for myself, followed Jesus. That's been the way that I followed, but in that space of who is God, what is truth,
Yeah.
what is reality. I come back to like what I absolutely know to be true is that like love is the core. Like
Yeah.
when your love is the core, and what is love, that there's layers to that of what is true, but like, man, love is the source. I mean,
And it's the
right, it's
only thing that really changes anyone else.
it
I
is
I was I was carjacked when I was in grad school.
yeah, not fun.
Carjacked. Okay. And my initial reaction, this was
Yeah,
probably actually a spiritual experience, but I didn't look at it in that light until many
yeah.
decades later.
Mhm.
Um, I was in Walmart. I got in the car. This guy got in the other side of the car. And I turned, and my thought in my head was, who the hell are you? And get the fuck out of my car. Right.
Yeah,
And then
yeah,
this like calmness came down and like pushed aside all of that. And what came out
yeah,
of my mouth instead was, are you okay? Can I help you?
yeah,
And he spun this big story about, oh, his girlfriend's in the hospital, blah, 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 having their first
yeah,
child from out of town, needs to get there. And so I'm driving around with this guy in this
yeah,
car, and he's got something next to him on the seat, under the seat. I can't see what it is.
yeah,
And I'm pretty sure I don't want to find out
yeah,
ever.
yeah,
And he directed me to this really bad part of town, which is nowhere near the
yeah,
hospital. Okay.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so I'm having this internal thing. There's this part of me going, he's lying his ass off. And there's this other
yeah,
part that's saying, doesn't matter. Just keep relating to him, keep being
yeah,
concerned for him. And
yeah,
he directed me to this darkened parking lot,
yeah,
abandoned gas station. I'm like,
yeah,
okay, this is not going to be good. And that
yeah,
little voice inside of me said, offer him what you were going to give the church, because I had
yeah,
set aside like $60 or something I was going to put
yeah,
in the offer plate. I'm
yeah,
like, you know what? I don't want to leave you out here in this bad neighborhood. I'm concerned for your well-being.
yeah,
And the fact that you're new to town and you don't have any money, you've got this child coming into the world. It's not much, but I'd like to give you what I was planning to give the church. Do
yeah,
you know where there's an ATM? And so he directed me to an ATM. I took out the $60 and I gave it to
yeah,
him. And I said, do you want me to take you back to that parking lot? And he says, oh, no, 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 no. Go drop me off up there under that street light. And I dropped him
yeah,
off under the street light.
yeah,
Now, I don't think that was the ending either of us expected when he got
yeah,
in that car.
yeah,
But something about my concern for
mhm,
him and his new
yeah,
family and my
yeah,
willingness to give of what I had to improve
yeah,
his life and to make him safe,
yeah,
he changed his mind about what he was going to do.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Wow, that's terrifying. That's terrifying.
It wasn't. It actually
Yeah,
wasn't, which is the
mm,
remarkable thing about it. It was not
yeah,
terrifying in any way,
mm,
um,
mm,
because this peace had come over me.
mm,
And I was just having this connected, concerned conversation with this guy.
yeah. Wow.
And it was only after
Isn't
he
it
got
interesting how
out of
we,
the car that there was any kind of reaction.
yeah,
And even then,
yeah,
I'd
isn't it
kind of
interesting
half
how,
forgotten about it for several years until I was in a kind of a similar situation. Someone was like, oh my God, you could have been, hurt or carjacked. I'm like, oh, I've been through that before. It wasn't nothing but a thing, girl. I talked him out of it.
oh, carjacking, no big deal.
No problem. I'll just love him out of it.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
there's so much power in that. There's so much power, like you said, and like stepping into a presence of love, and operating out of that. And because you could, like you said, you could feel the different radio frequencies, like, hey, the different channels of operation, like, hey,
Yeah.
fight, flight, or,
Yeah.
freeze,
There's
like,
what
hey,
my
you, I,
lizard mind
fight.
wanted to do. And then there was like
Yeah,
this higher self
yeah,
presence
come on.
that was available
Yeah, yeah.
and that fortunately I listened to.
A different, and yeah, just the power to create different outcomes. And yeah, love is the stuff, man. And what you said too about knowing, like, hey, seek to understand, that's powerful. It's I'm in process, as we all are, but it's been, as just been married out. My wife and I, we got married last year. And so yeah, thank
Congratulations.
you. It's been such an awesome journey. I feel so grateful for her. It's just, and that's another thing, man, when if you can find the right partner, the right spouse,
The
that,
relationship is so
yeah,
supportive and all the drama's out there. I
and
have
that,
I had a former husband and then I've got my
yeah,
bonus husband, and night and day difference.
version 1.0 and 2.0. Yeah. And it's like, man, and I've always known that, I'm like, if I can just get this one thing right,
It makes
it
all the difference.
solves
Everything
so
else
many
is so
problems.
much easier. Yeah.
Yeah. And but that's something that we try and demonstrate with each other. I try, it's a value that I have of like, and sometimes, we have an interaction and the breakers get switched and I escalate or I react, but it's the go-to is, I'm like, okay, I'm up. I can feel all this chatter up here. Can I like settle down and just, and we've even had like, disagreements or kerfuffles the last weekend where it's like, hold on, like, what do you say? What are you actually saying here? What's the actual conversation we're having? It's not about who ate whose chocolate, or it's not
Or
about,
the
it's like,
toilet paper went over instead of under. Yeah.
yeah, it's about like seeking to understand. And we've ended in some really cool understandings where it's like, oh, you felt like I wasn't respecting you, like you felt like I wasn't considering you or thinking of you or valuing you. That's what this is about. Or like you felt like, so it's like, oh, that's what that, oh, now that I understand it, I'm irritated and annoyed if it's about who ate whose chocolate, but I'm like, I actually really get it if it's about not being respected and valued, because I can relate to that. So you're so right on, is, man, and somebody, I always feel like if I can understand someone, I may not agree with their actions, but even if they're a serial killer or whatever, it
Yeah.
sounds terrible. Like, there's always a reason. Like, Hitler did things for a very specific reason. It doesn't mean that I would ever choose the same outcomes, but if you can understand why someone is doing what they're doing, it's like, okay,
Now
they're
at
a
least
human
we
being.
know, yeah, what we're
Yeah.
dealing with and what our options are
Yeah.
going forward. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
So
and
that's
you can
so,
find, what do I want to say? You can find the compromise that's a win for everybody when
yeah.
everyone understands.
Yeah.
And it's always on you to be the one to understand first. I
Yeah.
know a lot of us have been through a lot of crap. And it's like,
Yeah.
why is
Yeah.
it always on me?
Yeah.
Because you've got to show them
Yeah.
You've got to show them a better way to move forward, because we
Yeah.
do the best that we know how to do. And unfortunately, we've had some really crappy teachers who
Yeah.
didn't know any better either.
Yeah. And that's so true. Like the Brene Brown, who I really love, talks about that. Just like the belief that everyone is doing the best they can as a taken as a general principle, and working from that position. Okay, like, hey, this person is doing a really terrible job as a boss, as a human being walking through life, but for some reason that's the best that they have to offer. I wonder why.
Yeah. Well, and honestly, if you
Powerful.
think about how bosses get formed,
Yeah.
it's not oftentimes what should I say, a thought out and trained methodical kind of thing
Yeah.
where they learn how
Mm.
to become a good manager or they learn how to
Yeah.
become a visionary leader. It's one of these things, they happened into this technique over here
Mhm.
and they tried this once and it kind of worked, and so they kept doing
Yeah.
that. And so we're kind of like these Franken managers a lot of
Yeah.
times.
Yeah.
And if we haven't been doing our own internal work, that's going to
Mhm.
show up in the Franken manager stuff that we choose to, the way we choose to operate. And
Mm. Mhm.
so that's part of the reason that I love working with women who are working to
Yeah.
strive into those managerial and those leadership positions, because
Yeah.
we can do it with a thoughtful and methodical approach, and we won't end up being these dysfunctional Franken managers that people bitch about.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, totally. And that's so true of all, like, our whole belief system. It's like, it's this duct tape thing of like a traumatic experience, a positive experience, a loving father, a terrible teacher. It's like, it's just this duct tape collage of software and scripts that are written. And then it's like, this wasn't planned.
Yeah, and then you
So
wonder
being able
why
to
you
go in,
have these strange coping mechanisms that your subconscious mind
yeah,
keeps bringing up for you. It's like,
yeah,
yeah, no,
yeah,
it completely makes sense why you carry around an extra 30, 40, 50, 150 pounds,
yeah,
because you were assaulted when you were
yeah,
young and cute and sexy. And so
yeah,
now you don't want to be cute and
yeah,
sexy because that's dangerous.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. And so if we want to lose that weight, maybe we need to figure out how to keep you safe without being overweight.
yeah. No, that's so true. And yeah, coming back to the theme of women, yeah, my biological father passed away when I was 2, and of malignant melanoma. And my mom raised us 4 kids alone for
Wow.
4 years. And so,
Salute.
oh, I know. And that's why I'm like, wow, women, mothers, and then especially like single mothers. I'm just like, man, my mom is like
Super women. Yeah.
was truly one of my heroes. And when I see like mothers and single mothers, like, let's camp on single mothers for a sec. Yeah, I'm just like, wow, like, what you're doing as a single mom is just, it's without glory and without honor. But
It is it is with a great deal of honor, but it's
yeah,
very
yeah.
messy.
It's yeah, it's a noble thing. It's not, you're not gonna win any awards publicly for it. But
Yeah,
it's
no, probably
so,
not, but you will raise some really good
yeah,
kids. And
yeah,
you will show them some really important character traits,
yeah,
and kids learn what's modeled for them. And that's
yeah,
another reason I love working with women, because
yeah,
we tend to be the ones raising that next generation.
yeah,
And part of the reason we still have the bias and the discrimination and the
yeah,
crap happening
yeah,
is because we haven't changed how we're raising the next generation. We're kind of allowing them to be
yeah,
raised by the culture,
yeah,
which still tends to be by far patriarchal and
yeah.
sexist. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, I like watching my mom. I'm like, wow, I have so much respect for you and who you are and what you've done. And my mom easily could have gotten her PhD in, psychology or any number of things, and had this whole career, and instead, yeah, chose or was thrust upon a life of like sacrifice and service that is, yeah, it doesn't get the accolades it deserves. So yeah, that's been a really powerful, as I think about, oh, what is success in my life? Who do I want to be? What kind of man do I want to be? I think oftentimes and not to say, the correlation I'm drawing is not that, oh, like, every woman should aspire to be a stay-at-home mom. The correlation of like, wow, for me, seeing my mom's example of just service and sacrifice was like, wow, I hope to emulate that in areas of my life. So yeah, that's been
Yeah,
would not be where I'm at
absolutely.
without the presence of powerful women in my life. So, and my mom was a force to be reckoned with. She was not
I'm
this,
sure she is. You don't raise
oh,
4 kids on your own without being one.
and strong. I mean, one of my brothers ended in the military. One of my brothers a police officer. One of my sister worked for CNN. It's just like very strong-willed, dynamic kids that, yeah. And so women, mothers, man, powerful stuff. And even, on that theme of like women in the workforce and executive roles, my wife and I have interesting conversations as she just finished her family medicine residency here in Portland, Oregon. And so
That's tough right there.
it's just fascinating. So
Salute. Yeah.
she's an attending physician now, and making that transition. But Yeah, it's interesting. So we'll have conversations around that sometimes. And some of those things, like listening to her, thinking about, it's like, it seems like, I'd be curious what you think. Some of it's almost like, I'm like, oh, I could see how that would be crazy making, because I'm as a white man, I never ask the question, oh, I wonder if they're treating me that way because I'm white, like that's,
Yeah.
or like, I wonder if they're treating me that way because I'm a man. Now, maybe in certain contexts.
Yeah, I
But
saw an interesting Facebook post today about privilege.
yeah,
And it's one of these things that's always invisible to you when you have it,
right.
until you're put in a situation where you're forced with that contrast. And so a
Yeah,
lot of times with a man, it'll be with their wife or with their daughter
right.
that it will first come up that it's like, oh, damn, they just completely disregarded my brilliant child's suggestion because she's a girl, and then, went with this boy's suggestion that was kind of half-assed.
Yeah.
And you start to see these situations and you go, oh, maybe this does need some rethinking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting, those conversations, like in the professional world, in the medical world, and there's some spaces that are making phenomenal progress. And it's also interesting because I'm like, hey, I'm also like, I'm still gonna like think things through. Like, I'm not just someone that's like, oh, you're, as a white man, you just now need to believe XYZ. I'm like, no, I've got a heart, I've got a mind. I'm actually still gonna like think things through, but I want to understand still. Like, I want to understand things that I will never understand. But it's just fascinating.
Exactly. And it's one of those things that the thinking doesn't really start to happen until the diversity starts to arrive, right?
Yeah.
Because it's all male, pale, and stale. My apologies.
Until,
the women and the folks with other cultural backgrounds start to arrive and go, hey, why are you guys doing it that way? Here's a thought. Let's try it this other way.
Yeah.
And that's when you really start to get the creative solutions.
Yeah.
And the thing that I find interesting is they've been doing some studies. I love studies. And they've been looking at diversity in the boardroom. And when you start bringing in a higher percentage of women and a higher percentage of other ethnicities, the financial performance gets better. Yeah. Historically, you've got the executive and the architect, these kind of INTJ types that end up in the executive suite, and they're not really the best choice to lead the company to profitability.
Interesting.
Which is really intriguing. And so it just puts more fuel in my engines to see that there are more women who end up on this course, on this trajectory into higher seats of power.
Yeah. And I don't know if it was a podcast I was listening to, but they were talking about Silicon Valley, and they were talking about and they might've been saying like, hey, you'll find a lot of like white homogenous spaces in Silicon Valley. And it might've been a study, but they were talking about like, for speed and scale, it's best if everyone is as similar as possible, because like they're coding. And so for speed and scale and Silicon Valley,
they're all thinking the same and marching the same way, which if you want to do something really fast and big, that's a beautiful thing. But if you don't ask the question about, is this the right thing to be doing? Right. Which is what the diversity brings in, you can end up some places that are really bad news.
And that was they brought that, they were like, but I think they had these groups, and some would be homogenous, and then others would be like, and some of them I think were even like highly trained, highly skilled, whatever. But then other was like just a true of diversity of like just a motley crew of races, training, maybe someone that's like like,
some with technical, some without technical.
A mailman, a CEO, a stay-at-home mom, like just like
hodgepodge. A
hodgepodge. And they were like, I think they were talking about maybe the long-term capacity to solve problems, because you've got such a diversity of perspectives on the single
and
issue.
Experience. Exactly. Yeah.
So that was interesting. It was like, okay, that makes sense. Where just interesting. Like, all right, if you're talking about
Yeah. So when you're doing the development, when you're doing the think tank, when you're thinking about long-term vision and strategy for the company, that's the kind of thinking you need, because that will get you the product that really sings to your customer more often than, you know, hey, we're all thinking the same way and rowing the same way and marching as fast as we can to this not so good destination.
What would you say, like, so you're working with a lot of executive women that are, or professional women that are in that space and trying to make their way, want to be successful and not destroy their bodies doing it. What would you say are the three biggest patterns you see, or the three biggest like pieces of wisdom that you're working with them on?
There are a couple of really big ones. One is you've got to do it all alone. Right? You were taught in school that, you know, don't cheat off of anyone else's paper. Don't ask for help. Don't call. There's not a phone a friend here. Okay. That is not how your career success works. You need to be connected to other people. You need to get things done through other people. It can't be all you. That is a recipe for disaster. So you have to learn to delegate, not just in the office, but in your home and your personal life as well. You can't be the only one doing the housework. You've got other bodies in this house with you. They need to carry their weight. They need to participate. And that, I think, is one of the beautiful things about children who are raised with the single mother home, is they are required to do things like chores and to help with cooking and this sort of thing. And I think it raises a more well-rounded person than if you're just doing all the things for your kid. And so that's the first thing. You've got to learn to be part of a team and to delegate. The other thing is you need to stop waiting for the invitation. We tend to wait for someone to invite us to apply for that promotion or put our hat in the ring or to become a mentor to us, as opposed to going out and seeking these things proactively. And we need to do it before we feel like we're ready. Another study, love studies, they looked at a couple of psychologists, I think Harvard, if I remember correctly. Anyway, they put together a resume. Okay. And it was about 70% accurate. And the only thing that was different on the resume was the name at the top. All the rest of the experience was equal. And one was Jonathan, the other was Jennifer. And here's what they found after they sent this out to a bunch of hiring managers. Jonathan got hired about 65% of the time.
Wow.
Okay. He got hired this was in the last 10 years, fairly recent. Okay. This isn't like the 60s we're talking about here. And they liked Jennifer better than Jonathan on paper, but they didn't hire her. And so the next thing I will tell you is use the pretentious initials, because it'll get you past that kind of a screen. If you are J.A. Anderson, great. They don't know if you're Jonathan or Jennifer, and it'll get you a better it'll get you a more even look and more likely to get the job. Now, here's the other thing. You need to apply before you think you're ready. Okay? Because men do this. Men will apply for positions that they're only 50 to 75% qualified for. Women wait until they're 100% qualified. This is why your colleagues are leaving you in the dust. Okay. This is where the perfectionist hat has to go off to the side, and you have to go, okay, I'm going to grow into this thing. So apply when you have 50 to 75% of the credentials. Don't wait until you've got 100% of what's in the job description.
That's
and then when they offer you the job, negotiate, honey, because they're going to lowball you. And that's part of the reason that this pay gap continues to exist, because the men will push back and they will say, I have a family I'm supporting. I can't accept this low offer because I'm responsible for my family. And that's the other thing when you negotiate as a woman. Don't negotiate for yourself, negotiate for the group. Negotiate for, I have I have 4 kids at home. It would be
Yeah.
irresponsible for me to not negotiate.
Yeah.
Or I setting an example for the women under my management, and it would be
Yeah.
irresponsible for me to not negotiate. The reason I tell you to
Yeah.
do this is because women are seen as selfish
Uh-huh.
if we don't invoke that. And so
Uh-huh.
you'll get a better result in your
Yeah.
negotiation to invoke that you're doing this for the benefit of a group.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter which group it is, pick a group, pick a
Yeah.
reason that makes sense in your situation, and
Mhm.
negotiate that offer.
Come on.
Yep.
That's really good. Yeah. Team, finding a team, outsourcing, finding partnerships and allies.
And it's going to feel
Yeah.
unnatural when you do this, right? Because
Yeah.
as women, we're not raised to do this the way boys are. Boys are
Yeah.
trained to push back.
Yeah.
Boys are trained to stick up for themselves. Boys are trained to ask for what they want. So
Mhm.
cut yourself a break when it feels a little awkward,
Yeah.
but do it anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been so cool to even like see my wife. She got a lawyer while she's negotiating her contracts as now her first like paid
Yeah.
fully paid
Fully
what she's
paid.
worth.
Yeah. And
Paid what she's
that's
worth.
the
And I'm
other
like,
thing.
dude,
Contracts are not written in ink.
no.
Okay. I know a lot of times they'll come with a contract and a pen and go sign this.
This is
No,
non-negotiable. Yeah.
no, you
Yeah.
need 24 hours at least to
Yeah.
look at that, maybe a
Yeah.
little longer to make sure
Yeah.
there aren't any gotchas.
Yeah.
Because if you have any ambitions outside of corporate, you need to
Yeah.
look out for things. There are clauses that go in these
Mhm.
contracts that say that anything you produce,
Intellectual
even if
property
it's
rights.
off the
Yeah.
clock, the company
Totally.
owns. So
Yeah.
you need to watch for that kind of stuff
Yeah.
and push back on it.
Yeah.
Some of them will prevent you from doing things on the
Yeah.
side. And you need to read these things,
Mhm.
especially if you have
Mhm.
any ambitions beyond the corporate world that'll take you in a more
Yeah.
entrepreneurial direction. Got to look at
Yeah.
that and you have to push back on it.
Yeah. No, and I mean everything you said is applicable to everyone. I mean, it's advice I would give to anyone moving into the professional world, but I love that, especially that you're saying like, hey, women that you're working with or women that are listening to this that are like, hey, I'm coming out of college or
Yeah.
I'm transitioning or I'm just ready to go for it. It's like, hey, here's the
Yeah.
short list. That's
This
great.
is like what I heard someone else call a sticky floor issue, right? There's
Yeah.
this glass ceiling that we're all
Yeah.
aware of, right?
Yeah.
And we're working systematically to take it
Yeah.
apart. And every woman that gets up that ladder takes it apart a little more.
Yeah.
But these are sticky floor issues,
Yeah.
this waiting for permission and
Yeah.
hoping
That's a
someone
huge
will
one.
notice you and
Mhm.
not negotiating the offer when it comes
Mhm.
your way. That's a sticky floor issue. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
we need to mop our floor and start
Yeah.
moving a little bit more fundamentally in the way
Yeah.
that the guys move.
Yeah.
Not that we have to take an attitude or be anything less than who we are,
Yeah.
but we do have to make these same moves that men do if we
Yeah.
expect to be keeping up with them pay-wise.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
Especially if you are a single mother, hear me now.
Hear me now and hear me roar.
Yes,
Yeah.
hear me, because you
Yeah.
especially need to be negotiating and
Yeah.
applying for these jobs before you're ready, because you need the money.
Yeah.
You're being mom and dad, and that means mom
Yeah.
and dad's salary at the same time. And you can
Yeah.
use that argument when you go in to negotiate.
Yeah. I love that. Wow. Well, we could easily have a part 2 or part 3 because there's a number of different areas like talking about some of Dr. Joe Dispenza stuff that I've been digging into that I think we would. But as we're landing the plane, I'm always curious. A couple questions. One, are there any quotes that either right now or just over on life that have been kind of a guiding?
I've got a whole bunch, but the one that really sticks with me today that I haven't put out there yet, and I'm getting better with names. I'm not going to say I'm terrible. I'm getting better with names, but I don't have the name on this one right now.
Yes.
It was in a book I read recently, and that author's escaped me too. Anyway, so she was interviewing a lot of professors.
Yeah.
And it had come up, this question of the guys applying for stuff they aren't ready for. And the professor replied back to that and said, if a guy comes to me and asks if he's ready to take a particular course, the answer is almost always no. If a woman comes to me and asks if she's ready to take a particular course, the answer is always yes, and she can probably teach it.
Yeah. Boom. Mic drop.
Mic drop moment right there.
Yeah. Go for it. Green light. Don't ask.
Yeah,
don't
exactly. You are far more qualified looking at that position than you realize.
Yeah. Come on. And how about, also always fun to hear, are there any books either that you're reading now or just that have been pillars that you're like, this is the book that I give to people the most? Or
I've got a few that I love to give to people. If you identified as being a highly sensitive person and you're like, oh my God, I can't imagine even playing this leadership game.
Yeah.
I want you to go find Rose Tree. Now I remembered that name. And she's got a series. It's called the Empowered Empath series. Book 1 is literally a workbook.
Wow.
And it will help you to identify tools you can use to work through these empath challenges that keep you from being able to do things like set firm boundaries, say no and stick to it. Let go of the people pleasing and start pleasing yourself a little bit more. And so I definitely recommend anyone who's in that HSP world, highly sensitive person, get Rose Tree's book. So many good books in the business world. I don't even know where to begin.
How about for you? Like, what's been the most what's been the most impactful book that you've read in the last year or two for you? It could be it could be personal, professional, just a book that's really made an impact on you.
God, I read so many books. I'm like a book a week kind of person. So, I mean, when you say in the last year, that doesn't narrow it down much.
I love it. It could be Lifetime. It could be the book.
Lifetime. You know what? There were 2 early on in my career that were like life-changing to me. And the classic Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People, was like, oh my God, who knew, right? That one is a classic for a really good reason. And then the other was, oh God, what did they call it? Oh, its name escapes me. I'm so sorry. It'll come to me.
I might know it.
We can put it in the liner notes. It's one of these big idea vision kind of things. Gosh, I forget. It has an example of a lady who decided she didn't have any money, but decided she was going to start selling RVs. And she went in and convinced an RV manufacturer to front her the inventory to start. Okay. Wow. That was one of the big examples in it. And I don't remember the name, but it was like the big idea or something along those lines.
Wow. Okay. Come on. Yeah. I just rebought How to Win Friends and Influence People aside at Powell's. And I was like, that's just such a classic. I got to get that.
It really is. You just have to have that one. It's some really foundational stuff right there. Wow. And who moved my cheese? That's another one that I really enjoyed. It's short and sweet, but boy, it gets you to the point.
That's about not letting the small things bother you, right? Like majoring on the majors kind of thing.
Yeah, it's like adaptability, really.
Yeah. I've seen that.
I'm big on adaptability. I'm one of these people. Humans generally don't like change. Okay. And I'm a little bit in that camp, but I tend to not be as attached to it as some other humans. So, it's really a nice lesson on the flexibility and, falling back, having a plan B, not being terribly attached to plan A.
Come on. No, change is uncomfortable, but it's like a muscle. It is so like a muscle. You work and you build some inner power, strength muscle to be able to engage.
Absolutely. I wish you'd warned me on the book titles because I would have written them down.
Yeah, I know. No, that's all right.
I'm over
It's
here
okay.
looking. I'm like, what else? Oh, yes. The other thing that I've read in the last couple of years that has changed my business in a dramatic sort of way
Mm,
is Ask
mm,
by Ryan Levesque. And it's
wow.
about polling your market
Wow.
before you decide to offer something out into the world. You can
Yeah.
ask your customer. You don't
Yeah.
have to know all the answers. You can ask them
Yeah.
what is the problem that they're facing, and that will get you a lot farther than trying to guess.
That's so, yeah, I've been hearing that from my business coaches and the books that I'm reading too. Yeah, it's so on point. Wow. And just a final, like, open-ended question, like, what is there anything left on your heart, mind that you're like, man, if I could leave people with one thing, this is what I really want to leave people with.
You are an amazing and wonderful creature. You have everything that you need to be dramatically successful in this world at the things that really matter to you. Don't try and do all the things, have all the things, be all the things. That's not you. Be you as deeply, authentically, and profoundly as you can, even if it looks kind of weird and glitchy to you. And I know we all know ourselves way better than we'd like anyone else to know ourselves. And know that that's the stuff you've screwed up, the things you've done wrong.
Mm,
You can forgive yourself for those and let that go.
yeah.
It's not necessary to continue to beat yourself up.
Yeah.
Focus on the parts of you that are amazing and wonderful and build those.
Yeah. That's what's up. That's what's up. I'm with you. Letting it go, keeping a short tally of, like, having grace and forgiveness with yourself. And yeah, absolutely, that we've got a lot in us to live a very magnificent life. Well, thank you. I just want to say thank you so much for coming and joining us today, joining me today.
Thank
And
you so much for having me. It's
yeah,
been a pleasure. 2 hours over.
yeah, I know. And I'm like, man, there's so much more that we could dive into. And it's so funny too. You could see the blue lights in your background, or the frilly chair, and you could think, oh, it's just all the woo spirit space. But it's like, no, you've got such a breadth of life experience that it's like, never judge by the blue lights. Don't judge the blue
don't
lights.
don't judge by the feathered chair.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's there's a whole lot in the feathered chair. So I truly an honor to have you, and I could see a part 2 and part 3 as we wade into the wild jungle of what it is to be human. So
I'm more than happy to come back.
awesome. Well, and to our guests, everyone, ladies and gentlemen, boys, girls, thanks for joining us today. And be sure to check the show notes. We're going to have all of ZofiaRennea Morales's links and whatnot. And please like and subscribe if this spoke to you. And we will see you guys next week.